Hey guys. So, whether you are a regular around our Meadow Heights family or maybe you're new around here, maybe last week you caught one of our online Easter gatherings and you're back to join us for worship again this week, we're so glad you're here. Either way, I'm excited about what we're gonna experience together today. And while we're on the subject of Easter, last week was kind of one for the record books, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but that was definitely the first time I've ever experienced Easter worship in my pajamas. At about 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, my family and we all gathered around my laptop at the kitchen counter to worship together with our church family. It was different and new, but it was kind of awesome. My kids are 5 and 3. So while I cannot, in all honesty, say that they made it all the way through the message, they were pretty riveted and joining in during the music. And when Jeremiah asked all of us to turn to someone watching with us and tell them, Christ is risen, they got so into it and they were yelling, Christ is risen. And that became a recurring theme throughout our whole day after that. So when we called their grandparents to wish them a happy Easter, both boys screamed, Christ is risen! And then later, when our family was doing the Easter Jam experience that Go Kids had provided resources for us, one of the challenges in there had them go outside and wish the whole neighborhood a happy Easter as loud as they could. So my kids run out onto the front porch, one of them in his PJs and the other one in a t-shirt and superhero undies. And with all the gusto of Mel Gibson in Braveheart, they yell, Happy Easter, everyone! Christ is risen! It was adorable. I so wish I had that on video. And then Craig and we really enjoyed after that getting to sit down with our kids and just have some simple, beautiful conversations about why we celebrate Easter and what it means for our lives today that Christ is risen. And I think one of the biggest surprises for me about the whole experience was that once I surrendered this picture I had in my mind of what Easter would or maybe should look like, God all of a sudden opened my eyes and my heart to see the beauty in the Easter that I actually had. And it was pretty incredible. And as I was thinking about how we might open our time today, I thought it might be good for us to take a few moments to ask God to open our hearts in that way too. So I'd like to invite you to pray with me. So wherever you are, if you're up moving around, maybe just sit down and slow down for a second. Go ahead and close your eyes and bow your heads. And we're going to have a few moments of prayer and reflection together. And I'd like to start by just giving you some time to think back over the last week and offer to God your gratitude for the things He's already done, or maybe the small moments that He surprised you with His goodness over the past week. Just go ahead and take a few moments right now to thank Him for that. And now I'm going to invite you to actually just hold out your hands, palms open, in a posture of openness and surrender. And take a moment to just ask God, what might you need to let go of today so that you can clearly see what God might have for you to hear or see in this gathering we're about to experience together. Father, we're so thankful that you are always present and at work, even among these crazy times that we're living in. And God, today as we gather together online in unconventional ways to worship you, I pray that you would just open our hearts and open our minds to what you're already doing in the world and to the ways that you want to meet us in the life we're actually living today. I pray that you would help us to slow down and let go of whatever we're preoccupied with right now so we can hear from you and clearly see maybe what our next steps are to step toward living the life you're calling us into. We love you. We're so thankful that you are with us here today. In Jesus' name, amen.
You were the Word at the beginning, one with God the Lord Most High, hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. Didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. Death could not hold you. The veil torn before you. You silenced the boast of sin and pain. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. Oh, what a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus.
You called me out of the desert and brought me into these streams, river of living water. You turned my bitter into sweet, and all my burdens are lifted. You shook the shackles off my feet, and there's no sound louder than a captive set free. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so, and sing of his promises evermore. And pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. There's joy in the morning, rising up in my soul. There's life worth living, because he calls me his own. There's a hallelujah after sweet victory, and there's no sound louder than a captive set free. No, there's no sound louder than a captive set free. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Sing of his promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Oh, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. You are my deliverer, the freedom I'm living in. You are my deliverer, you are my promised land. Oh, you are my deliverer, the freedom I'm living in. Oh, you are my deliverer, you are my promised land. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Sing of his promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness and let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Oh, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. I'll never be alone. How could my voice be quiet? You're my deliverer. You're my deliverer.
Hey there, everybody. Whether you are a Heitzer who's gathering this weekend or one of our new friends who's along for the ride, we're really glad you're here as we start a new 3-week conversation we're simply calling Through. Now, I need you to have a pad of paper or a note, just scrap of some sort. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, and a pen or pencil handy. If you don't already have that, why don't you grab something real fast, and I'll share this story with you that I read this past week. Apparently, in the Bridger Teton National Forest in Wyoming, which is home to the largest mountain, the highest mountain in the state of Wyoming, there is a suggestion box for hikers at the base of the mountain. And these are some of the actual suggestions that have been left in that box. Please avoid building trails that go uphill. Somebody did not understand Tetons whenever they got into this situation. Here's another one. Ski lifts need to be in some places so we can get to wonderful views without having to hike to them. Isn't the whole point, the hike? And then you'll love this one. Escalators would help on steep uphill sections. Now, when do you think these hikers forgot that hiking up a mountain is supposed to be hard? That's baked into the experience. Well, somewhere they did, I guess. But honestly, the truth is, most of us don't really like hard things. Do we? Nah. In fact, if these last few weeks have shown us anything, they've shown us how uncomfortable we are with difficulty. Yeah, we like smooth, level paths for life's journey. There's just a little problem there. I mean, everybody gets why we would engage in pain avoidance. That's just smart if you can pull it off. But the problem is, in real life, pain and struggle are unavoidable. They're baked into the experience. Now, I don't know how you're handling the difficulties of a lockdown, but it's real. It certainly is affecting us. It is not easy. This has been hard for many of us. Now, it's probably at different levels of hard. There are some of us whose lives maybe are mostly comfortable and convenient, and they've really been upended in ways we didn't anticipate, and that has been a challenging transition. There are probably some others of us who are thinking, welcome to my world for a change, because some of us are used to the hard stuff all the time. Maybe even COVID-19 is the least of your worries right now. Serious, I'm being very serious about that. The truth simply is this: nobody gets through life without going through something tough. Life, by definition, is hard. Sometimes it's hard because of stuff we get ourselves into. Sometimes it's hard because of stuff somebody else gets us into. Sometimes it's just situational, like this current situation that we're in. Nobody is really in control of that. It just happens. But life is a struggle and life is difficult. Thank God there are smooth places along the way, but much of it is just hard. It's a smooth place leading us to the next hard place, if we're honest. So, here's what we thought we would do. Our teaching team is going to take 3 weeks, and we're going to dig into this idea of how do I get through the hard stuff so that I don't just end up through, I'm done, and check out. How do we get through that as people of faith? How do we do that knowing that my life with God is a reality? So can we, as Christians, find meaning in the struggle? Well, some experts tell us that our faith actually goes through 3 phases or 3 stages anyway. Everybody's does. Now, we have different names for these stages. I've used Richard Rohr's progression with you before. We move from order to disorder to reorder. I like that one. But for the purpose of this series, we're actually going to use these phrases to describe the stages of faith we all go through. First of all, there's this one. It's confident faith. Everybody starts out here. When you first realize you're connected to God, when it's brand new and it's fresh and it's so real, man, it's exciting. It's such a relief. It's like all of your prayers are working. God is right here with you. So much joy and peace that you didn't feel before. It's confident faith. Now, how long we're in the confident faith stage varies from person to person, but eventually everybody moves from confident faith to challenged faith. It's unavoidable. You don't get out of this one. Now, when you move here, I think the initial response is, I just want to go back to the confident faith. Can I please? Because now it feels like my prayers are going nowhere. They're hitting the ceiling. It feels like God isn't with me. I don't know where he is. Does he care? Is he aware of what I'm going through? Why does my faith feel stale and predictable and routine? I want it to go back to being exciting again. Maybe you have felt that way since this pandemic showed up. I don't know. I'll tell you one of the ways that's affected me, and there are many of them, but one of them that I've noticed lately is I'm finding it difficult to pray. I'm finding it difficult to focus my thoughts and to just feel compelled to spend time in prayer. And then I'm also struggling with my sleep rhythms. I'm finding that I can't sleep at night the way I normally do. I'm usually a really good sleeper. Now, you would think this could be an advantage. I mean, if you can't sleep, then Brian, why don't you pray while you can't sleep? I don't know. But for whatever reason, it hasn't been working out like that. And I wonder if you've had some changes that have been difficult for you since all of this started. Here's where you need your pen and your paper. I just have a note card here, but grab that if you would, real fast. And I want to take a moment. We're just going to pause. And we're going to own for a second whatever the hard thing or things might be in our life during these last few weeks. And just write it down. It could be a word, it could be a phrase. I know some of us might have a list. I'm not going to give you too long for that. But let's take a couple of seconds right now. What's something tough, something hard you're going through in this current situation? Let's do it. I'll do it with you. Okay, you got something? I ended up with 3 or 4 here on my list, so it didn't take me too long to write them down. Why don't you just put that off to the side? I promise we'll come back to it in just a few moments and it'll come in handy. Now, as challenging as these things might be for you, faith challenges, the good news today is that eventually we move from the challenged faith stage to living faith. And this is the place where we all really do want to be, where it's like we're not untouchable, but it's like our faith has gotten so grounded, so much a part of who we are, that the hope and the joy and the peace don't really get disturbed too easily by the challenges that life throws our way. Everybody wants to get to the living faith stage. However, nobody moves from confident faith to living faith without going through the challenged faith stage. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this series. How do we respond to the tough times so we can get through? Now, every week around here, we like to take scripture and let scripture inspire us, speak to us. And we're going to get some help in this series from the Old Testament. We're going to drop in on the people of God. They're known as the Israelites in this particular case. And we're going to revisit their exodus from the land of Egypt. Many of you may be familiar with at least part of this story. Now, how they got in Egypt hundreds of years before was a famine, a severe famine. They threatened to starve them all, but there was food in Egypt, and they happened to have a family connection in the highest office in the land. We call him now the Prince of Egypt, and his name was Joseph. He was second in command to the Pharaoh. And so they actually ended up in Egypt and didn't just save their lives from the famine, they got their own property. They had all kinds of convenience and comfort because they're connected at the palace, But when we drop in on them right now, that's long gone. Joseph is long gone. The political connections they have that brought them favor no longer exist. And in fact, the Israelites are now slaves to the Egyptians, and their everyday life is brutal. So how do they get through? I think their story can help. Now, we're going to actually look at 2 different situations they find themselves in. And you're going to notice 2 very different responses. All right, we're going to start in Exodus chapter 3, and we're going to drop in on a guy named Moses. When we meet him, he's hanging out in the wilderness, tending his father-in-law's sheep. Here's what happens. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush, and Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. Now, that's weird, of course, but you might remember when we talked about this last fall, we visited this story one weekend. We said that fire in Scripture is often a sign of God's presence. And so when the storyteller tells the story, his original audience would pick up on that right away. Something big is getting ready to go down. So Moses goes over and he gets a closer look at this bush that won't burn up, and he hears the voice of God speak to him from within the bush. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now go, Moses. I'm sending you, buddy, to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Now, I read over it pretty quickly. I don't know if you caught it or not, so I'm going to drop in again. Did you notice what the people of God were doing in their misery? God says, I've heard them crying out. They're crying out to God in the tough thing that they're going through. Now, a lot of us have probably been doing that lately too. Or I hope we have, because we have a good Father who longs for his children to cry out to him. In fact, the God they're crying out to thousands of years ago in this story is the very same God we can cry out to right now. He cares about us. He sees us just like he did them. And he actually wants to be with us and to rescue us. And that is really good news. However, I want us to now jump over to Exodus 13 and find another situation. And in this case, Moses has been sent by God to take the people from the bondage of their slavery in Egypt. And here's what happens next. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. This, my friends, is interesting because I'll bet you felt like this in your own life. God, would you please rescue me? I'm crying out. And God, would you please do it the shortest, fastest way you could come up with, right? What kind of rescue is this if you're going to take me on the long road through the desert? Like, how many weeks or months is this lockdown going to go on anyway? Because sometimes a rescue doesn't feel like a rescue, does it? No, it feels more like challenged faith, as we were talking about a couple of moments ago. And that's probably what they're feeling like here. Is God with us? Yes. Is he working? Yes. But then why don't I feel it? Why don't my prayers feel like they're working? Why doesn't it feel like God's listening? Why doesn't it feel like God cares? This is not what I thought rescue was going to be like, God. Have you been there? Yeah, I think some of us have. Now, just an aside, but I think a pretty important one in this story is while they're on this long road through the desert, some pretty awesome things happen. We may know the story about how God rolled back the Red Sea so they could walk across on dry ground. Yeah, that happened on this journey. Maybe you've heard about where God turned salt water into fresh water so they could quench their thirst, or he led them by a cloud by day and by fire by night. All of those things happened on this journey. So miracles, like supernatural things were happening to them while they're on the difficult long road. You know why? Because God is always present, my friend. And God is always at work. And I wonder if you've noticed any ways that God is at work in this pandemic, in this lockdown of the last few weeks, in your own life, in your family, in our church, in your community, on your job. Are there any fingerprints of God that you've been able to identify? Because he's with us and he is working. And sometimes we miss the good things that are happening when the rescue isn't what we imagined it was going to be. Now, you would think they've seen some pretty amazing miracles. You would think, man, they've surely arrived at the living faith stage by now, haven't they, Brian? Well, not so fast. I want us to go to Exodus 16 now and listen to how it actually went down. In the desert, the whole community of Israel complained, hang on to that word, about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat. We ate all the bread we wanted. But now you've brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. They're pretty dramatic. Not that we would ever do that, I'm sure. And this is after they've seen those miraculous places where God showed up and was working. Now, remember, they started all of this crying out to God for a rescue. And now they're complaining to him because the rescue wasn't anything like they imagined it was going to be. Same people, two very different responses in the situation. Now, when we cry out, that's a plea for help, isn't it? I'm suffering. This isn't good. It's hard. Help me. When we complain, however, we're saying, wait a second. I deserve better than this, you know. And if there's a difference between crying out and complaining, we could probably describe it in one word: trust. Yeah. When I'm crying out, I am determined to trust God. I mean, I wouldn't be crying out if I weren't saying, I believe you're present. I believe you're at work. I believe you will let me meet you in reality where I really am. I believe you do care about this, God, maybe more than I do. So I'm crying out. I'm trusting. I want to trust, at least. But when I'm complaining, it's not usually trusting anymore, is it? Now I'm telling God, I think I know what's best. Well, yes, I want to rescue. I just want you to do it on my terms and on my timetable. Hey, we have an opportunity right now. We haven't had an online confession moment since we've been doing church like this for the last few weeks. So why don't we try one, okay? All this requires, if you've never been part of one of these Meadow Heights confessions before, is honesty and participation. Just own wherever you are and participate, okay? So how many of us have complained at least one time in the past week? If you have, here's what we're going to do. We can't raise a hand, I guess, so just hit the like button right there on the post where you are part of the gathering, all right? Have you complained at least one time? Let's confess. Let's own it. Hit the like button, because I certainly have, and I'm sure it hasn't just been one time. No way. All right. Most of us Probably all of us, if we're honest, are in the same boat. Here's what's real, friends. We will all go through something tough eventually. Nobody gets out of the challenged faith stage. Nobody gets to skip from here to here. Everybody goes through. And so if we're not going to just be through, be done, we have to say, how do I get through? Let's do this. Grab that piece of paper where you wrote out a tough thing a few minutes ago, and let's just do something with that as we wrap this up today, all right? What is it that has you feeling like you're lost in the desert on the long road? Maybe you're disappointed. Maybe you're disillusioned. Maybe you have questions and God doesn't seem like he's answering them. Maybe it's your work that's been crazy, or maybe it's your lack of work and you wish you could work. Maybe it's your health or your finances that have you backed into a corner. What did you write down? What's been tough and hard for you lately? And as you sit with that, I want you to remember that like God's people in the Exodus, we have two possible responses to this right here. We can complain, and we probably have. And God gets that, I think. But we could also just cry out to God because he lets us meet him in reality, doesn't he? The good, bad, and ugly of life. And I guess my question is, have you done the crying out part to our good Father yet? Because he wants you to, and he welcomes it when our faith is challenged. And I know it's understandable that we would ask God, could we skip this hard part? Could we get back to normal, whatever we were doing before? Does my faith have to be challenged? I want the pain to go away. That's understandable. It's human. And sometimes it happens. It does go away. God does answer that prayer. But often he does not. And I just wanted us to remember today that even when he doesn't, he's still with us, and he's still working, and he still cares more than we could possibly imagine, and he invites us to bring those concerns to him and to cry out, because we get to meet him in reality. And by the way, Jesus is always our supreme example in all things, isn't he? We just celebrated his crucifixion and resurrection a week ago. Can I remind you that the night he was betrayed and arrested, the day before he was crucified, he's in a garden and he's praying, and you know what he's doing? He's crying out to the Father. He even, because he knows it's safe to meet God in reality, he even says, could we come up with a different way to do this, God? Let this pass from me. And then he ends his prayer by saying, but not my will, but your will be done. So he cries out, but obviously he's doing it in trust, isn't he? Yeah. And if Jesus felt that freedom and permission, then I think we can. And it ought to be a reminder that if God is just like Jesus, and if Jesus goes from that garden to hang on a cross, he knows what suffering is, doesn't he? In fact, he takes our suffering onto himself. He came to help bear our suffering, to be with us in our suffering. So this God, who looks just like Jesus, understands. And when we have to go through the challenges, and when he doesn't relieve us of them, it isn't because he doesn't love us, because this is what love looks like. He's just up to something else. He's doing something else good in the middle of the suffering. And the cross of Christ reminds us that God gets that, and he goes with us through it. And I don't know, friends, how long this will go on. None of us do. That's one of the challenges, I think, that's the biggest in all of it. So regardless of what happens tomorrow or next week or next month, or if it takes till summer or whatever, I wanted us to remember good news this weekend. Yes, God's present. He's always at work. He cares more than we do. And a God who looks just like Jesus is here to get us through. So you have permission to cry out to God. And I thought we would just end our time together today by taking the next couple of minutes to do that. Why don't we just spend some moments in prayer or reflection, bringing these things to God and say, God, my faith is challenged, but I trust you. So I'm going to cry out. Would you do that with me right now?